This video is going to be a how-to guide concerning how do you interpret and integrate your active imagination experience so that you're getting the most out of the experience. And to do this, I have basically distilled Jung's collected works, Volume 8, The Transcendent Function. I draw heavily on this, and I have combined that with my own experience into a guide that I will be going through to help us. In the description, there's a Google Drive link that you'll notice, and that contains the free PDF guide that I'm going to be going through, which I made specifically for this video. So I wish you the best, and I hope this helps you. All right, so what you have before you is this document that I have mentioned. It is just a humble 5 pages. And these are just examples that I'm going to be referencing later from my own active imagination experience to make the point. You can see before we get into it, I refer to Collected Works 8, Transcendent Function, paragraph, the 170s, 80s, 90s. That's the Transcendent Function, obviously by Carl Jung. And I don't bother putting Collected Works 8 in as we get going because it's pretty obvious. I think that's probably the only work from that volume that I cite, or from the Collected Works. So I've entitled this Active Imagination Integration. It could also be called something along the lines of Active Imagination Interpretation, Active Imagination, how to interpret, how to integrate, how do you get more out of your active imagination? How do you do more than just have the experience? Which is, it is beneficial. And I've been trying to hunt down this quote that I read in researching the last video, the technique video. Jung says that having the experience in and of itself is beneficial. And yet he also goes on to, with his patients, to talk about it, to discuss it, to do more than just have the experience. So we're kind of in this, if you're watching this, I'm hoping, ideally you're in this middle ground. You have either, ideally you've been doing this before, and you're this is kind of more of just a help to you. But if you're somebody who's never done active imagination, hopefully you've watched a technique video, you've learned how to do it, it's starting to become natural, maybe you've done it 2 or 3 times, you're exploring your mind, you're understanding who you are, and now you're seeking, well, I have, 2 or 3 of these experiences, whether they be, the transcript kind or the visual kind, or you're drawing, or maybe even, sculpting something, as Jung mentioned several times in the Transcendent Function. And you're like, how do I get more? Is there more to be had? And the answer is yes, there is more to be had. Thankfully, there is. Purpose. What is the reason that we try to go beyond just having the experience? What is the purpose? The purpose, and this isn't just me making this up. I hope that's understood. I hope that's clear. Yes, there is my own experience, but a lot of this is just drawing from Jung, who's the master of this. He was the master. The purpose is widening your consciousness. Not in some mystical way of, I guess like a new age sense of consciousness, vibrating more in tune with the universe. That's not what I mean. I mean widening consciousness in a very real, very tangible, very concrete way of your consciousness of who you are. Outside of the collective. Your consciousness of who you are, what makes you up. In distinction from what are the norms that you follow. What are the collective values? What are the normative societal values and aspirations and things that you look up to, things that you follow that aren't necessarily who you are? How do you find out who you really are? And it's really sad in our day. A lot of personality is like, oh, I'm into this show. I like this kind of food. Oh, I'm really into this right now. Okay, that's great. More power to you. But what's it inside of you that makes you incline towards that show and that cuisine or whatever it may be? What inclines you towards that? What makes you up? Who are you? And that is the purpose. Widening your consciousness of who you really are. The goal is to treat the unconscious as equal. So that's the purpose as well, is to see the profundity of the unconscious and yet not venerate it, nor to say, oh, it's just, yep, that's what I thought. Okay, we're done with that. To see it as an equal, to recognize there is this other half of you, and it is just as equal. It's just as valuable. It's just as sentient, and it is you. It's the other half. Your consciousness, your awareness, you consciously, the ego. And by Jung's definition of that, who you are consciously is half of who you are, not 100%, not 75%, but half of who you are. And to understand this, to meet this unconscious, and to understand it as equal, and this does not just happen merely by having an active imagination experience. This comes about as you wrestle with what is it trying to say, What is it communicating? And again, not saying, well, I don't understand it, whatever, just throwing your hands up. And on the other hand, not saying, oh my goodness, this is some fountain of wisdom that's just, oh my goodness, I've never seen such things. That's easy to do, at least, speaking from my own experience. That comes more easily to me. The goal is to say, this is just as equal as my conscious experience, my conscious convictions, my conscious awareness. To understand it and then combine it. This is the goal. And then to combine it in the end with your conscious experience. In other words, that combination, that synthesis, it's to integrate this opposing part of you, the conflicting, disjointed, opposing, that it's not necessarily in conflict, but it's not your conscious self. It's not the ego. It's something different, and it's not always in harmony with you consciously, but to integrate and find a way to move forward as these two halves. It's like oil and water, and Jung has described it in this way in Mysterium Conjunctionis, if I'm remembering the title correctly. But I recall reading it in there where he's talking about it's yin and yang, it's these unmixable halves, it's these unmixable parts, water and oil, and yet they have to touch, they have to combine, they form you. They should be in harmony. Again, combining you, joining the halves, integrating the unconscious and conscious into a unified, harmonized whole is the goal. For the visual imaginers, because I'm not, here's the transcript that I use right here. There you go, sense and focus. And I'm on whatever, how many pages, I don't even know. How many pages are there? I don't know. Quite a few. It's in the 40s. I'm on page 31 because that's where I was referencing for what you're going to see later on pages 2 and 3, I believe, or 3 and 4. It goes into the 40s. Well, that's a big transcript of my experience because it comes audio visually, usually with, it's not always, sometimes it's just a character, but oftentimes it's just my inner voice. And that's common with Jung says, he says it could be a character, could be like Philemon, which he encounters in his, that was a recurring character in his active imagination in the Red Book. Oftentimes it's just your inner voice, a disembodied voice, but it's accompanied with visual elements, and this is all written down in the transcription, which I tell more about. If this is new to you, then it's in the technique video, which I keep referencing because I'm just concerned somebody's watching this and they don't know what I'm talking about, and this is like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. But I'm trying to help, help such a person to understand what we're talking about at this point. Some people don't have this experience. Some people have a visual experience and they're drawing, be it a mandala or just, a painting, just a landscape portrait style painting. They don't hear a voice. There is no other. Jung says to you, if you're in the shoes of this person, if you're in this situation, he says, faced with such products, the ego must seize the initiative and ask, How am I affected by this sign? This Faustian question can call forth an illuminating answer. That's your job. It requires a little bit more introspection because there is no voice explaining things to you about what's happening. You have to ask, this additional question: what does this really mean? How am I affected by this? And it calls forth an illuminating answer. And Jung says for people who don't experience active imagination in this way, it's like a foreign language. And to me, I feel like it is, because I don't experience it this way. It's a foreign language. I'm just providing this because this is Jung's advice, and I just want to include the people who are not necessarily the audio and visual combined people, the running transcript type of person. So that's kind of your task. In addition, the mindset. He says in Collected Works, Volume 8, The Transcendent Function, paragraphs 172, 175, your method is unique to you. It's not merely something that you will to do. It's not like, okay, let's get out the calculator and just put in the numbers and it's all going to just flow out from the raw data. This entire process is something that will come naturally to you, and it will reflect your own unique personality, your own unique way of doing things. Jung says experience gives clarity. So it sounds intimidating. It sounds abstract if you've never done it. If you haven't spent the time sitting down with the transcripts and saying, all right, what does this really mean? That can be intimidating, and I understand that. Jung says, just do it. Just go for it, and your own unique way of doing things will eventually solidify, it will eventually crystallize, and you'll come to understand exactly how to do it. The goal, and this is kind of what the mindset involved, the goal is neither to be too aesthetically obsessed nor too intellectually obsessed. We don't consider we don't divorce meaning from form. We don't, on the one hand, fall into the aesthetic pitfall where we obsess over the forms and the artistry and, oh my goodness, like what you saw and all the amazing things that you beheld or that your unconscious revealed to you, in the visual or in the audio kind of way. We don't obsess over forms of the experience to the neglect of the meaning. The value of the experience in this pitfall is misplaced into the artistry and the expressiveness, missing the goal of integration and understanding of the meaning, which helps us then integrate. The meaning, however, is conveyed in part, to some extent, by the forms, and we can't then neglect the forms and the symbols. This is the understanding pitfall, which neglects the forms chosen by the unconscious, by which to represent itself, and obsesses rather with meaning. In other words, it's hyper-analysis, it's over-analysis, it's intellectualization. Imagine you're in a college course, and you're talking about, let's say, the book, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And the teacher is just obsessing over the meanings of little obscure things, and it's missing kind of the broader picture that has been painted. And that, I guess, would be an example of the understanding pitfall. Missing the importance of the symbols employed by the unconscious. Because the symbols, again, the entire experience, whether it's audio, visual, or both, or something else, which is possible, the entire experience is shaped by the unconscious, right? The unconscious is choosing how to manifest itself. And therefore, its choice of form is important, is expressive of it. That can't be neglected. So we strive for balance. We give due diligence. He says this in paragraph 175, giving due diligence. If you're just skimming over it, if you're just doing it in a very cursory, rushed method, then you will miss out on details. You will miss out on meaning, the significance of the forms. You won't miss out on the form itself necessarily, but the significance of it if you rush. So being balanced in this way, avoiding these two pitfalls, and giving your due diligence, not rushing to a conclusion or being cursory, will safeguard you and help you get the most out of this very deep and very meaningful, profound experience. Moreover, another mindset, another thing that we should keep in mind is not venerating the unconscious, but realizing again, it is equal. It is a part of you. It is you, okay? It is not another being. It is not an entity speaking to you. And I understand that a lot of people come to this entire field of psychology, especially the Jungian side, especially active imagination, from the New Age. And I'm not making any kind of judgment when I tell you that this is not an entity that you're speaking with. And that's a common element of New Age practice. All I'm telling you is that when you're in active imagination, according to Jung, and I would, obviously affirm this from my own experience, you're speaking with you. And that's an amazing thought. Like, how can I be speaking with me? And Jung tells you elsewhere, we talk to ourselves all the time. This is not some amazing, mysterious thing. But you're speaking to you, and that part of you is not greater, and it's not lesser, but it's equal. It's dangerous to venerate the unconscious, especially once you have experienced active imagination for yourself and you see the amazing world within that it reveals. We tend to overvalue. That's the tendency at first, will be to venerate it, to overvalue it, because we see how we had undervalued it before. 176b. And basically paraphrasing what he's saying, what Jung is saying, we undervalued it before. And so seeing this amazing world just unfold before your eyes, unfold before your ears, you have this tendency then to overvalue it. Be aware of this. And in overcoming this, be aware of your tendency then to become skeptical altogether of the unconscious. This is Jung's wording. It's difficult to understand in a certain sense. Why would you become skeptical of it? Because you'll be, there's a tendency. It's like, wow, it's so different. You might be inclined to say, well, then who can understand it? This is all just a bunch of meaningless symbolatry, symbolism, symbolatry, I guess, maybe in one sense. But you'll just throw your hands up and be like, this is just some delusional, crazy, almost like maybe even like a schizophrenic kind of experience. It's just like these crazy meanings, and you just develop this skepticism. That's possible, and I felt that in my own experience, although I don't tend towards it. But there was a time early on where I was kind of questioning it, and towards this tendency of skepticism, or to feel inferior, like there's no way I can understand this. There's no way I can interpret this. You'll feel unable to judge it because there is no collective schema by which to judge the manifestation of your unique individual unconscious experience, I could add. Jung warns of this. Let's talk about this for just a moment. No collective schema, because as new and amazing, I guess, as this experience of beholding your unconscious is for you, imagine therefore how new and otherly and outrageously different it will be for somebody else. There's no collective, there's no societal norm by which you can judge this completely other thing that you behold within. There's just no, like, what category do we have? What category does society provide for you to judge what you beheld? And in light of this, there's this tendency that Jung warns about of feeling inferior. Like, well, I guess, this is just way beyond me. There's no way I can understand it. What does he say specifically? What are Jung's own words? These erroneous judgments are due to the individual's unconsciousness and lack of self-reliance. Either he is able to judge only by collective standards, like an undifferentiated person. He's only able to judge, well, what would society think? What would my friends say? What would so-and-so say? That's the only way I could judge this. Or else, owing to ego inflation, which is, I had to look this up to understand exactly what he meant. Ego inflation being the over-identification with your conscious self, saying that my conscious self, my ego, is all there is. There is no more. There's no deeper part of me than just merely what I am aware of, what I'm thinking right now. That's ego inflation. Identifying the self as 100% the ego. Because of this, you may lose your capacity for judgment altogether, Jung warns. If you do fall into these erroneous judgments of feeling inferior to this, or becoming skeptical, you can examine yourself along these lines right here. And hopefully that, provides illumination for you in overcoming this, which I truly hope, if you are in that situation, that you are able to overcome it. Experience mediates all. Go for it. Yeah, that's the way forward. I would say that I'm by nature more of a cautious person. I'm not somebody who just hops into something, impulsively. I kind of do risk assessment, I guess, but I'm telling you that just going forward is the best way, especially when the way forward for you will involve, it's so personal, it's so unique. The best way forward is just to go forward as you. Relating the ego to the unconscious. So we kind of covered mindset and purpose. We're kind of get a little bit more into the specifics and into actual real technique, I guess. As you review your transcript, image, sculpture, whatever it is, keep in mind this. This is a quote from Jung, from 182, paragraph 182. We shall not define the individual ego here, but we shall leave it in its banal reality or banal reality as that continuous center of consciousness whose presence has made itself felt since the days of childhood. It is confronted with a psychic product that owes its existence mainly to an unconscious process, and is therefore in some degree opposed to the ego and its tendencies. In other words, since the earliest times we are aware of, it's always been the conscious self. It's always been you and your mind and your thoughts and your, the outside world out there. That's all there's ever really been, that we're really aware of. And this side of us, this conscious side, but really we mean your ego, not in the negative sense of like egotism or egocentrism, but you, the conscious self, is confronted with the psychic product, with the unconscious experience, and is therefore in some degree feels opposed. You feel a tension, you feel a conflict between this unconscious side and the conscious you that you've always known. You've always probably, if you're like 99.999% of people, assume that it's only you. The conscious side of you is only you. At least for some point in time, you've assumed this. Coming across the unconscious, naturally, therefore, there is this tendency for conflict. This is tremendously significant because as you do this, as you go about this act of imagination, and invariably you come to behold the total you in totality, and you become aware of the fact that you are not 100% pure, affirmation-worthy goodness, wholeness, completeness, kindness. In other words, you are going inevitably to come across very negative, intrinsic qualities about yourself. Things about you, about the total self, that are not just light and goodness. They're dark, and they're tough to accept that this is you. The self-loathing that normatively remains unconscious. Why does it normatively remain unconscious? Because people normally don't behold their whole self and accept it, and accept that, hey, that is me. Hey, I am a little bit intolerant about this. I am naturally greedy, these things about yourself. And there's some more profound things. Hey, in this situation, I probably would do this, and this being some terrible thing. Normatively, people don't accept that. And normatively, people think that they are good, that they are better than they really are. This is just a normative thing that's very easy to, observe. But having taken the steps to integrate yourself, these negative things become conscious and you have to address them. If you want to accept yourself, you can't play mind games and say, I am just some holy paragon of virtue and goodness and compassion. There are negative parts of you just as well. And if you want to integrate and if you want to understand the whole self, then you will have to stop the games, take off the mask, the persona. And I say this as having done this, I'm not preaching to you. I'm saying this as one who strives to walk this path myself. And you have to then acknowledge the negativity and the darkness within, which is a very common theme in Jung's writing, the darkness within, embracing and accepting this as part of you. You become aware of the qualities about yourself that are joined to you not just by some choice that you make or some preference that you can change, but these qualities joined to you by nature. They are immutable. You can't just will to be different. They are part of you. They are tendencies that arise spontaneously of their own nature. And they are you. And they're dark. And they're loathsome to you. And yet they are you, and you can't wash them away. They remain. This is not a reason then to overvalue and identify excessively with the unconscious, because it's revealing all of this, and you're like, my goodness, there's just so much wisdom. It's showing me so much about myself. It's not just showing you there are these negative things. It has a lot to say about them. It's very, at least I guess my unconscious is very strongly opinionated. And the quote above, which I read up here, reflects our tendency then, having lived by necessity consciously, and almost exclusively consciously, probably for most of our lives, since the days of our childhood, then beholding the darkness to identify with the unconscious because it stands in opposition to the ego and its tendencies. The unconscious, and this is something Jung talks about, and this is something Jung demonstrates from his own experience in the Red Book and places, where his unconscious and active imagination will criticize him, who he is consciously. Like, hey, look at these inconsistencies about yourself. Look at these dark things that you do, like it's judging you, it's criticizing you. And so the unconscious can seem to you, wow, it's wise. Wow, I guess, it's not dark then because, if it's from some standpoint it's criticizing these bad things, well, it must in some way be virtuous. And I guess in some ways it is, we don't immediately say it's not, nor do we venerate it. But we shouldn't overly identify and say, that is me and my conscious self that I detest in some way, especially having seen it in the light of day, so to speak, is not what I like, therefore I will overly identify with the unconscious. That's an error that Jung warns about. He says of this very issue, this is a quote, a block quote, I guess, this standpoint is essential in coming to terms with the unconscious. The position of the ego must be maintained as being of equal value to the counterposition of the unconscious and vice versa. This amounts to a very necessary warning. For just as the conscious mind of civilized man has a restrictive effect on the unconscious, so the rediscovered unconscious often has a really dangerous effect on the ego. Once you discover that unconscious, there is that tendency for it to become overbearing and you to yield to it and say that it is not just equal, but it is better. And to overregulate and overcompensate and overly oppose the ego. It should be considered of equal value. An equal opposite, I guess, like from physics. An equal and opposite force. A personal example that I want to give you from my own experience is probably active imagination, somewhere around, I honestly don't know, maybe number 10. And I probably done about 16 to 20, something in that range. And I had come to overvalue the unconscious to the deprecation of my own consciousness, to my ego. And in response to this, my unconscious, in the active imagination, firmly and yet kindly scolded me concerning this. So the line at the top here that I'm highlighting is cut off, It's on the previous page. As you can see, I have like the what is it called? Like the stenographer pad, I guess you would say. Inside, I didn't want to have to take a third image just to capture one line, so I just quote it for you. What I'm saying to it, it's unfolding all of this wisdom to me, and I basically say, "Oh, I wish to know beyond my inner suspicions and my unformed though present ideas. I wish that I, wasn't so confined by all of these like tendencies of my conscious self." Unformed ideas, like influenced by things that are, I have these ideas, but they're not like consciously fully formed, but they influence how I think. And I have these inner suspicions and inner biases, and everything's kind of hazy. I want to know beyond that. So, saying this to the unconscious, you make me aware, you give me this wisdom. It's what I'm asking of it. Here's the transcript, or here's the image, but I transcribe it here for you so you don't have to read my scrawly, Pinskerly handwriting. It says to me, "You do you?" This is my inner voice, by the way, my inner voice. See, it was some character, I can't remember, but it like morphed into my inner voice. "You do you? Behold, I speak from within you, and am not the fountain of all knowledge. You are not a god, are you? Anticipating a no." I understand that the New Age has its, practitioners have views on this. It's anticipating a no. You are not a god, are you? And by that it's saying, I'm part of you. You are not a god. Therefore, I don't have divine wisdom for you. I am not the fountain of all knowledge. But I will also say this, that a human once formed, and not all are, I guess it would be once individuated, once it's like its own person, and you know who you are. You're integrated, you're individuated. Not all are. Such a person does not know where he goes. He is cast about, but he does not know to where. Behold your thirst for knowledge, lest this be Gnosticism, like an endless quest for that secret knowledge. You think of like John Dee and where that led him. But as for this, he is cast about, but does not know to where, because you realize all the forces and all that makes you up. You're not just the alpha male willing that you go forward and willing this, and you're going to conquer that, and you're going to do this, and you're going to control life, and you're going to shape the world in your own image. Once you move beyond this delusion, once formed, once you understand yourself, you realize you don't know where you're going, that life is pushing you places. You aren't pushing life places. So I just couldn't help but explicate that just a little bit. Continuing, I scroll down, it leaves off up here, and the transcript below begins right here. Behold, they, humanity, may know, but let them know they are but human. I grow as you do. Feed me data, and I too will grow, but do not seek from me a fountain of eclectic knowledge. However, by understanding yourself, you understand the world. By looking within, you understand without. And the union, only by great exertion, then, is the integrated self. He corrects a misguided view of mine. This is my parenthetical note during this act of imagination. He corrects a misguided view of mine here that he is a fount of mystical, otherly wisdom that can easily, instantly bring understanding. He's saying, I'm receiving information about the world too. I'm experiencing and growing just like you are. But it's good for you to be looking within, because as you understand yourself and as you do this, it's encouraging me. It's like saying, okay, I've criticized you, but hey, keep going, keep striving, let's keep uniting unconscious and conscious, because as you understand yourself more, you understand the world more. And we're going to see that's very true, and that's Jung's conclusion as well. It's interesting when your own active imagination concludes the very thing that Jung has said many times. That's an amazing thing, in my opinion. So in conclusion, as we're talking about kind of how to go about this in the right way, uniting conscious and unconscious, relating to the unconscious as an equal will become a challenge to you, not as you've done this once or twice, but as you have done this, and as you go these further steps in deriving meaning and interpreting and integrating this, then these things, these challenges will arise. If you've only done this a few times, I applaud you for doing that. I applaud you for taking the steps and learning and trying. I've talked with people who have begun doing this, and I understand it can be very difficult. It can be overwhelming. And Jung talks about this, and I've spoken to one person who it's almost like it's overwhelming your mind. Like it's physically draining. It's emotionally like just overwhelming. I haven't experienced that personally, but Jung warns of that, and that was his experience of his patients. So I get that. I applaud you, but it's not over. Like the journey is not over just when you've had the experience, although that is very beneficial. There is more. There is quite a bit more that you can glean from this. And once you do this, and I'm talking to you who hopefully are considering, let's take this pad of paper. Let's take this and let's go through it. Before I go to bed, let's read through this and discuss this with your significant other or with a friend, or if you have a Discord server that's psychological or whatever you have, let's go through this and discuss this and glean more from it. There are challenges you're going to face, and I'm trying to help you navigate that in the ways that I have found helpful and in ways that Jung himself found helpful when enjoined to his patients. Relating the ego to the unconscious. Hopefully that kind of helps you in that process. And again, I know some of you might be like, well, I wish it were more specific. I know. This is a very unique thing to you. This is there are many methods of doing this as there are people who do it. So I'm trying not to limit, because I could just say, let's forget the audio or audio only people who just hear the voice. Let's forget the people who just see the image. Let's forget them and just talk about ways that I have this experience. I'm trying to keep this broad to be as helpful as possible to as many people as possible. Relating, again, results, like, okay, not purpose, it's different from purpose. Purpose is kind of like an overarching thing. Here specifically, what we should accomplish is relating to yourself as first and key and relating to others. Why are you doing this? What is the purpose? What is this helping you to do? Understanding yourself. Why is that important? Because, and you may not understand this, or you may not, might be kind of surprising, especially if this is one of the first times you hear of this. But how you understand yourself is a reflection of how you understand others, and how you understand other people is a reflection of what you think about yourself. If you have beheld somebody who is capable of relating well to others, and they're clearly like in tune, or they're one with their self, they know themselves, they're well balanced. You know what I mean? If you've seen somebody like this, a good role model, they're not unbalanced. They know themselves and they know others. And those two things are related. Jung says this, paragraph 187 from the Transcendent Function. For to the degree that he does not admit the validity of the other person, he denies the other within himself the right to exist, and vice versa. So that vice versa part would be, to the extent that you do not admit the validity of the other, the opposite, the shadow of yourself, you deny so too the right of the other to exist in somebody else. The capacity for inner dialogue is a touchstone for outer objectivity. If you're somebody who looks at an entire swath of people, like a category of people, oftentimes it is political, but it's not only political. It can be many different things. And you say they're all just a bunch of compassionless hypocrites. They're all just hateful, vile people. Well, chances are, if you're just willing to just blanket that onto an entire group of people, and you deny their validity, being other, then chances are there's a part of you that you're loathing, that you're hating, that you despise about yourself, and that probably is unaware to you. And just speaking from my own experience, you do this and you behold dark things about yourself. And then you look and it's like, oh, that's why, whenever I see this kind of person, I always, it's like, I just want to vomit them away. It's like, I always see this kind of person and I just don't like them. Like I want them, I just want to get away from them. I don't want to spend time with them. They irritate me. They annoy me, so on and so forth. And you do active imagination. It's like, oh, that's why, because hey, there was actually that thing that I hate was actually a part of me. And therefore, it's like this whole time I've been loathing myself, which is why I've been loathing them. That realization is very powerful. That realization is one of the main purposes, I would say, of doing this, of going this extra step and integrating and doing this. The capacity for inner dialogue is a touchstone for outer objectivity. So again, your ability to accept the shadow, accept the darkness within, is a measure of also the inversion of your ability to objectively and fairly behold the outside world. Your acceptance of yourself helps you accept those who are different from you. As we reject the other within us, and I'm kind of paraphrasing this, as we reject the other, that part of you that you don't like, that is loathsome, that is different, that is conflicting within you, as you reject that about yourself, embodied by the unconscious, which this entire process is striving to understand, we reject the very right of others to exist, especially those whom we disagree with and find distasteful. And as we reject the other person, we deny our own right to exist. Invariably, you will find qualities about these people that you just for whatever reason, they don't sit well with you. Invariably, you find that in yourself to some degree or another. This is the concept of self-loathing, often unconscious, that I talk about on page 2. What is the importance of this? Overcoming that sense of self-loathing. More ubiquitous than you would think, I'm telling you. It's oftentimes stated in a cliche kind of way, isn't it? Like self-loathing, oh, they hate themselves. That's why this person is saying this. They just hate themselves. They just hate this. Okay, maybe so, and the more people say it, and the more willing people just casually throw that out there, the less seriously I take it, and the more I think it's kind of just become like the term projecting. Oh, you disagree with me because you're projecting. Well, that might be true in some cases, but probably not in a lot of cases. But in all seriousness, self-loathing is very common. It's a facet of, I think it's it's not something that people are overly aware of, but nonetheless, I think it predominates to some extent or another. The conscious and unconscious coming together, harmonizing, reconciling, and in some kind of mysterious, abstract way, mating, If you understand what I'm saying, if you've experienced this, if you've witnessed this in yourself, you understand what I'm saying. It's not sexual, but in some way, it's almost like it's more than just like they're just shaking hands, They are conjoining in some way, and it bears the offspring of wisdom and right relationship with yourself and with others. So this process of active imagination and subsequent integration of the entire self, the uniting of conscious and unconscious, it's frequently described as the great conjunctionis in Jung's writing, Mysterium Conjunctionis, or in alchemy, the great conjunction of opposites, the synthesis of opposites. Something neither entirely conscious nor unconscious is begotten from this conjunction, this mixture, this meeting, this uniting. It's like they have a child, and this child is not purely consciousness, and it's not purely the unconscious. It's some kind of third entity. It's like this, it's part of each, And I find that this offspring, and this is all very abstract and intuitive, but if you know, and in all seriousness, not as a meme, I'm saying if you've experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. The offspring is wisdom, it's love of others, it's acceptance of self, it's like self-actualization, self-realization, integration, individuation. I think all of these things are basically the offspring of this unity, this great conjunction that I've been talking about, that is the result of taking seriously this and spending time with it and avoiding the pitfalls and seeking to integrate what you've experienced. So I leave off with this example. And good, this video is under an hour, thank goodness. From my own experience, from this quote on page 3, but I will say this, that a human, once formed, and not all are, does not know where he goes. He is cast about, but he does not know to where. And I took time to explain it earlier because I knew it would be, I was going to use this as an example. I've been working on Tyranny of the Will, which is a book that follows the short story Tyranny of the Ego. They're related, but they're not, it's not, obviously they're not just one and the same, obviously. And I guess as a synopsis, Tyranny of the Will is about a girl, Emma, who, we'll just say, by way of synopsis, comes to understand herself, and that all these voices in the world that are saying, just be disciplined and just seize life by the horns and stop being poor and pull yourselves up by your own bootstraps, that it's just all chicanery. It's just all a bunch of malarkey. And that life carries people around. You don't carry life around. It carries you around. There are much greater forces in the world than just you and your will and what the mark you're going to make on the world. I've been working on this book, and I wanted you to understand it. That's why I went through that rather lengthy synopsis. And when I was researching for this little guide that we've just gone over, I came across this quote from my transcripts because I was reading just to kind of familiarize myself with what I had experienced. Refamiliarize myself. Some of this happened, the example I gave you happened about 5 months ago. So, yeah, about 4 or 5 months ago. I realized then that the entire thrust of this book, which to me, it just seemed to come to me spontaneously, like I kind of knew what I was wanting to write about. And then one day, it's just hypnagogically, in the morning, I remember it just came to me, this whole story with, it's about 400 pages right now, and I'm about done, hopefully very soon. It just came to me, from some creative corner of my mind, like the plot, how I would dress the ideas that I had, like what form they would take, how I would convey it a narrative, came to me. And when I came across this quote, after having written all these pages in almost 70,000 words right by now, I was like, wow, this isn't new. What I just explained, the synopsis, is basically this right here. All of this to say, the entire thrust of the book has already been expressed in my active imagination. The above quote is just one of many examples that I could have given. So without realizing it before, my unconscious had increasingly become a part of my conscious thinking as I had had these active imaginations, which are, they take effort, they take time. And then it takes even more effort to then sit down and read them. Mine are only about, 5 pages of these handwritten pages, 4 or 5 pages. It takes effort then to integrate them and to look over them and interpret them. What do they really mean? There's a lot that you'll find out that isn't just apparent the first time you experience it, even the first time necessarily that you read it. Gradually, you behold yourself, reflecting the hitherto mysterious, unknown, unconscious half of you. Months after this experience, I reflect this, I've changed in some way. I've grown. I've become something that I wasn't before. And this book that I was writing wasn't just me and my conscious mind, my ego, deciding to do something. This is some overflow of some unconscious experience. It's an unconscious experience that was made conscious by active imagination. This is the living conjunctionem, the living conjunction, the conjunction, the synthesis, the union of opposites lived out. Living, this example shows it's living, it's ongoing, it's dynamic, it's with you long after the experience. Long after you've interpreted it, it's there. It's affecting you. It's shaping you. It's growing you. You're more mature. You're more aware of yourself. Therefore, you're more aware of the world and the nature of others and what's happening and how things go on in the world. And you're more aware of the bounds of your will. You're not omnipotent, right? You don't merely just set your mind on something, believe and achieve. Well, it's obviously not that simple. You're more aware of your limitations. You have a more well-formed view of the world. So that is the example that I hope ties this all together for you. So I appreciate you going through this. I hope this has been useful for you. Again, this is in the description. This is with Google Drive. This is not some, shortened URL that you're not sure is where it's going to go. This is from Google Drive. This is obviously, therefore, free for you to download, print, use, give to your friends, whatever you want to do. I hope it's benefited you. Well, there you go. Hope it's been helpful, and I encourage you to subscribe because I'm going to have a lot more content. I've been thinking about especially saying what's been helpful to people, namely the technique video itself. How can we build off of that? How can we go further? And this video was a result of that. I encourage you to subscribe if this has been helpful, which I really, honestly, truly do hope it has been for you. Please like it and share it with those who are into this. Share the technique video with people who don't know about active imagination. I haven't been doing this for, vastly long, about 6 months or so. And if only more people knew about it, Jung seems to be the bridge between psychology as a field of study, as an academic interest, and psychology as something you personally experience, and really as a means of knowing yourself more. And by knowing yourself, thereby knowing others and knowing the world around you. Feel free to make use of the PDF in any way you wish. It is copyrighted, but print it out. You can share it. You can, distribute it. I don't care. As long as you give me credit, that's all that really matters. And I hope this has been helpful for you. Wishing you the best in your journey in understanding the depths and the complexity of who you are. This is Brennium Thinks, and I hope to see you next time for the next video.